Hey guys, welcome back to Green Room, episode 2 of our Road Through Romans. And so today, what we want to do, last week we kind of talked about the author. Today we're going to look at kind of a broad overview before we jump in and dive in deep. Romans has been described as the most important Christian letter ever written. And clearly history has shown that to be true. So curiosity, what about you guys? Most important letter you've read? By the way, we probably need a little note of explanation for millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah. What is this letter
A
you
letter
speak
is
of?
like...
That's why I said, you mean Facebook message?
They all just hit stop, so I don't know.
Can we just
These
say
are the things
Facebook
you
message?
write to create words out of, right?
Yeah. What's the most important message you received? How's that?
So I don't know if this is the most important one, but this is what came to mind. When I was living in Africa, we had snail mail that would arrive, and most of the times when it arrived, it was completely destroyed. So it just totally shredded, and it was kind of like so I got a lot of stuff. I was like, I don't even know who this was from. But one time I got a letter from Kate, and this is before we were married or dating or anything like that. And it was just this encouraging little note, and she sent me a mixtape. A mixtape, which you guys don't know what that is. Yeah. Before there was playlists, there was a mixtape. And it was just awesome because my truck actually had a cassette player in it. Nice. And I could listen to that the whole time.
Now, mixtapes say, I really love you.
Yeah, it did.
Because the way you had to record a tape was manual. You had to set things up. You had to push stop and oh my gosh.
And put your pencil in there.
Yep.
In the old days.
I miss tapes.
Did you anything come to mind for you? Or?
Yeah, I think probably my most important letter I think I ever received was when I was in treatment, and Heather sent me a letter.
Wow.
And because I was lost, I was broken, and to be honest with you, I wasn't sure if she was going to be there when I got out. Sorry, honey. And but she wrote me this letter affirming that I had made the right decision and that she loved me and just encouraged me with lots of scripture and let me know that she couldn't wait for me to get out, which then made me feel better that she would be there when I got out. But it was just Heather's really good at writing, and she just wrote me the most encouraging letter that I needed to hear at some of the darkest moment of my life. So I think that was probably my most important letter.
Wow, that's powerful. So one of the reasons that letters can be powerful is because once put in ink or whatever form, it's fairly permanent. I mean, you have it as a powerful referential you can keep going back to, and it's kind of sad that we've moved away from an age of written letters because there's such significance. And I think when my parents died and I was going through their home, and you have to get rid of everything, and when you see something written, like I know my dad's writing and I knew my mom's writing, when you see something written by their hand, it's just so personal. And letters have power. Well, the book of Romans, it's a letter. It's probably the most important Christian letter ever written and has influenced Christianity in some pretty incredible ways. We're going to talk about that today, and walking through the road through Romans, we're really going to look at how this letter has such significance. So letters are powerful. This particular letter influenced Rome. It influenced the first and probably one of the most important theologians, Augustine. It influenced the fork of Christianity, Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. It influenced one of the greatest Christian revival awakening movements of history, out of the Wesleyans. Romans has been one of the most influential, and so as we go deeper, you're going to see that and why that's so important. But when you walk through a book of the Bible or any letter, there's some critical questions we learned in English when you were in school. You should ask the who, what, when, and all that. So we're going to do that real quick and look at it. So who wrote this thing? Who wrote this book? Well, that's what we said last week, Paul. But interestingly, and most likely because of Paul's eye disease, Paul through TERTIUS. The technical Greek word is an amanuensis, somebody who basically dictates for you. And Paul is dictating this, and evidence might be that it has some of the longest run-on sentences in the Bible, in this thing. And I think it might just be Tertius is like, slow down, he's like, I'm trying to write this thing. But all the content flows out of Paul. Thankfully, letters in the Greek world started with the author. They always start I, Paul. Why in the world did we screw this up?
Yeah, right?
Because now it's like you start reading something,
Who is
that's really
this?
inflammatory. You go, who the heck wrote this?
You got to go all the way to the end to find out.
Yeah, who wrote this? So, thankfully, they said, this is who is writing this thing. Number two, the second thing you asked is who was he writing the letter to? So, who's he actually? Well, in verse 7, he makes this statement, and we're going to look at this some more. To all who are in Rome, who are loved by God, and who are called to be saints. Now, for most Christians, we don't commonly use that designation, and there are even whole religions that reserve as a special class that word saint for just special people under a special circumstance. But that's clearly not the testimony of the New Testament. New Testament designates all believers as saints. And so for us, we think you would never think of yourself as a saint, but here's the cool thing I love about God. Most of us would be very cautious to consider ourselves a saint. But God always names who we're becoming rather than who we have been. Mm-hmm. And it's transformational that God says, this is how I see you when I look at you. And so Paul is just acknowledging what God is saying is that you really are this. And so he says, I'm writing to the saints. Now he's writing specifically, again, to a church. Churches are gatherings. We mentioned this recently, a gathering of people. It's not a building. This is before Christianity was legal. So it's mostly house churches. They would, if there was a synagogue in town, they would meet in the synagogue or the temple. If not, then they would meet in a house. And the good news is that most of their houses were households. So anyone who had decent wealth, and we find that in Paul's travels, had a fairly large house that was built in Greek style, which had a fairly large patio section. So it was perfect for a house church. So it was pretty easy for those households to be able to accommodate 20, 30 people. That wasn't hard for them to do. And if it grew larger than that, then they would meet somewhere else. But when he says a church, he's literally saying the ecclesia. That's the Greek word. He means the group of gathering of believers who are in this particular town. Now, he hasn't gone there yet. Paul's never been to Rome. But at the end of the letter, in the very last chapter, we find out that Paul knows a whole bunch of people that are associated with this church. And so he has a little bit of relational cred, but most likely the church itself was founded by someone who he had led to Christ. And since it's in Rome, what we also know about Rome is that this is the capital of trade. So, this is a popular place where people were coming and going. So he's writing to this group. Number 3, where was it written? Where was Paul at when he wrote this? Well, he wasn't in Rome. He's in Corinth. And the only reason we know this is he identifies who he's staying with. He talks in 16:23 about being with Gaius. And we know that Paul stayed with Gaius for about 3 months during that journey while he was in Corinth. And he's kind of writing a letter ahead. And so we'll discover that in just a moment. But it's pretty well established that that's where it came from, even though it's not earth-shattering. Mm-hmm. Like if we found out, oops, he wrote it from Philippi. Okay, whatever. It's not that big of a deal. When was this thing written? Romans was probably written in a winter of AD 56 to 57 during his 3rd missionary journey. So most likely, there are several factors pointing to that. He mentions that he's about to set out for Jerusalem. We know that was the tail end of his 3rd missionary journey. We know that's when he was arrested. He mentions his desire to get there, but he hasn't gotten there yet. He mentions that he would like to travel to Spain, but he has not yet gone to Spain. And for all historical evidence, we don't believe that Paul ever made it to Spain. So that's the when behind that. 5th, or next, why was it written? Why was it written? Well, Paul didn't start this church himself, again, but he did have some distinct purposes why. First, personal, he's introducing himself. Wouldn't it be cool if people let you know they're coming? Before you're ready, pop in visitors, it's like, ding dong.
Get the house straight before I'm coming.
And so he's announcing that, and he's introducing himself a little bit, even though he knew several of the people that could vouch for him. Second, it's educational. This is the only letter of Paul, since he didn't have personal connection with the church. He didn't found it himself. He doesn't have a lot of knowledge of the church. He finds it important to lay the groundwork of Christianity 101. Man, thank God, because we know and understand more of the most fundamental doctrines of our faith from Romans than almost any other New Testament book. And so he kind of feels this obligation to kind of dive into the elements of the gospel, because he wants to make sure that this church has the truth of the gospel. And Paul, like unto the first followers of Jesus, he's been given this mantle, the baton of carry the gospel to the next generation so that they get it right. And so, man, he just lays it out.
And that's what made this book so important in later generations. I mean, it was the fact that he went so deep in having clarity on theology around salvation and sanctification and these things that led Martin Luther to get really hung up here. Like, so if he didn't get hung up on the clarity that was here, he wouldn't be able to say, well, maybe what I've been taught is wrong. But it's because Paul put it there that he could really read it over and over and over again and dwell on it. And that's what led to people being able to use these works later on to do really great things. So it's a really important thing to point out how clear he made that.
Yeah, another beauty of that is that the Church of Rome, we know, was pretty diverse in mixture of ethnicity as well as balance of Jews and Gentiles. And because of that, he really does a great job of not assuming. And some of the other books of the Bible, like Hebrews, makes lots of assumptions of things that you already know from the Old Testament. And he doesn't do that. He does a phenomenal job of giving you enough depth and clarity that you don't have to be an expert in the Old Testament to understand what he's talking about. I think it's just amazing.
Yep.
The third reason he wrote this is that financial. It's a fundraiser. He's actually letting them know that he wants them to participate in sponsoring him for his mission to Spain. So he says, hey, if and when I'm able to do that, and he fully planned to do so, I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to stay a while, which he always did in all the churches, sometimes as much as years. I'm going to stay a while. We're going to develop a friendship, a relationship. I'll do ministry there, teaching, and then you can help me. You can help me on my mission trip to Spain. So pretty cool. He's letting them know that's the why. How did the letter get there? Romans 16. We find that he actually sends it to them through a fellow believer by the name of Sister Phoebe, who is a deacon in the church in Centuria. And he says, welcome her in the Lord. So she hand delivers the letter. So she's probably a fairly wealthy merchant, and she's probably common for her to make her way to Rome. And so he's using that UPS delivery system. And number 6, the most important. What's the main message here? What is the message of Romans? Well, the message fundamentally is the gospel. He's laying out the gospel in chapter 1, verse 16 and 17, and we'll go a little deeper. He's just saying, hey, I'm not ashamed of this gospel. And for us, the word gospel is pretty common, but for them, I'm laying out the good news. I'm letting you know the good news of what God has done. So he's laying it out, and he's saying that's going to be my purpose. So he states it right up front. In most books, you'd start looking for keywords, like what are some phrases that keep coming up over and over and over. And some of those are, obviously, God comes up many times. But law and grace and sin, some of the primary keywords that happen throughout the book of Romans. So you're going to see that come up.
Yeah, I love how he takes us through that journey. Makes it, like you said, clear of, hey, this is what God did. Here's the creation. This is what happened. This is the law and what it was intended to do. And then now here is God's grace through Christ. You know, it's a pretty, it's a lot to read, but that theme is easy to pick out, you know, of him explaining all of that pretty clearly.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because since there was a diversity in that church of Gentile and Jew,
Right.
there's no better apologetic system for speaking the gospel to non-believers than Romans, because he actually does an apologetic that's not dependent on Jewish background. And you only find that in Romans. You don't find that anywhere. Anywhere else. He clearly comes all the way back to say, hey, I don't care if you understood the Old Testament or not. I don't even care if you're a Jew. Yeah. All of creation itself testifies that there is one God, that He is a creator, that He knows you, and your conscience also affirms what is morally true. So Paul just, man, he dives deep when he says, this gospel's going to work. I don't care what your background.
Yeah. Just to clarify, in case you're not familiar with this term apologetic.
Whoa,
right? Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, this is this
where might we be doing that?
yeah. It was it's not saying, hey, I'm sorry. That's not what they're talking about. The idea of offering an apologetic is explaining and defending and sharing truth in a clear way so that you can convince somebody. Is the idea. I'm offering an apologetic, and you can probably go into more detail about that. But
no, I'm glad you said that. It just comes from the Greek word apologia, and it means from logic. So, logia or logos also means reason, to set in an orderly form. So it means to speak your case in an orderly way that makes sense logically. We get that same word. But actually, it's cool because Pastor Gary is walking with our students in equipping them for their faith on Wednesday nights. We call it Equip. And that's part of what you're doing.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to use that time to was to have a moment when I could speak to high schoolers about topics, broad topics that they really need, that they don't get to hear anywhere else. And so being able to carve this time on Wednesday nights, really, really super important. And apologetics is definitely one of those top things, so that when our kids leave to go off to college, leave to join the workforce, leave to join the military, just move to a different place, we can say, they have a firm foundation and they're going to be able to keep their faith there, but even help others to come to know the truth. Had our first topic that was an apologetic type of topic just last night at Equip, where we said, hey, what do you do when your friends say all roads lead to heaven? Wouldn't a loving God make it a way for everybody? So you ask your kids, see what the answer they give you, and then I'll get to talk with them more about it. It'll be fun.
Yeah, if your high schoolers are not getting in on Equip and being equipped to defend their faith in a world increasingly hostile to Christianity, man, they're missing out. Our kids need to be able to not only know what they believe, but why they believe it and how to defend that. And I promise you, the world ain't going to make it easier.
That's right.
So let's do a broad overview, and that'll conclude today. So there are 7 divisions, and most authors would say 5 primary divisions. Kind of the capstones is the salutation, how you guys doing, and the ending. So to keep it all in S form, I had salutation and sayonara.
Of course.
So what are the main content sections? Sin is the first thing he deals with, chapters 1 through 3. And he goes through a beautiful escalation of where sin came from, what sin does to us, and what sin does in its progressive depravity. And so he goes through pretty strong words about sin. And then the next section, that leads us to salvation. What did God do to fix the sin problem that we have? And that's in chapters 3 through 5. And then we move to my favorite, sanctification. So sanctification. So explain sanctification. What is that?
The way I simply explain it is being like Jesus, growing to be like Jesus. I think that's the simplest way to understand it.
Yeah, and it sounds like a highfalutin word, but it's actually the core of the reason of why we were saved. That Jesus saved us, not just to keep us from hell, but to prep us from heaven. And to make us more like Christ. And so it is that process of becoming who we were meant to be.
It's kind of funny that for most Christians, we spend a whole lot of time thinking about sin and thinking about getting saved, but we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about sanctification. But the reality is, we live in the sanctification moment longer than just that instant of salvation, or you know what I mean? It's like the bulk of our Christian life is spent on this journey of sanctification. But so often that gets the littlest thought from us. It's really cool that that's included in here as something that he says, no, this is important.
When I Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying he dives deep
Yeah.
on the significance as well.
Well, and I think, that's the joy, and that's why I'm so glad we're going through this book, because, I think for me for a long time, you focus on the sin, the right and wrong.
Yeah,
I've done this and that. And when you understand what Paul explains here, you start walking in the joy of knowing, how much God loved you and what he did to save you, and, that he's with you to help you. And you start, I think, get more excited about who you're becoming than who you were or the mistakes you generally make, and I think that's what it did for most of the guys that you mentioned. They read this and they were like, oh my gosh, like this is not what I thought, and it changed their life. And I think that's the same thing that I think is going to happen to many of us as we go through this. And I always say, the more you get closer to God, the more you fall in love with God. And I know that this book and this study is going to do that for us, which is just going to be cool.
And I would go so far as to say that the principles and the truths taught in Romans 6, 7, and 8, if Christians understood those concepts and the principles he's actually teaching, 90% of the heresies and false understandings of Christianity are addressed.
Yeah.
But people don't know those principles, so we go in so many false roads. So he goes deep, and then in case you had any gray matter left, in chapter 9, some people would call it a parenthetical, and it is a little bit in the letter. He goes into a parenthetical clause of, by the way, on the issue of sovereignty, free will, election, predestination, which is very heady, but we actually are going to tackle that as we get through this. So we're going to talk about that and tackle that. And then finally he ends with what any great message from the gospel should end with, how to put it into practice. So he says, start serving. So he goes, phenomenal in Romans 12:1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you offer yourselves as a living sacrifice. So Paul moves right into this idea of like, look, we've hit some great theology, but now this is where the rubber meets the road. So he hits with that, and then finally he ends with that sayonara. So that gives us that big, broad overview. Next week we'll dive into the verses. We'll start going into sections and cutting up the chapters into logical sections and going through that. But let's end today with what would you say is the one big outcome of just the overview? What would you say is one of those big outcomes or big application points?
Read it. Now that I know what good stuff's in there, man, why don't I take note of it, right? I mean,
Maybe find one of the reading plans. Maybe you would even want to say, let's find a reading plan for the book of Romans and make sure that I'm going through this as we're studying it.
Yeah.
What about you?
No, I think so. I think preparing yourself, reading it, and being ready to have your life completely changed. I think there'll be many people watching our groups that will be encouraged and reminded of these truths. And then because I think that's what happened when he wrote this to the church. Some were like, yeah, that's right, and then some were like, man, I didn't know. And I think that's going to be the same thing that's going to happen out of us. So I think get ready, because I think your life's going to change as a result of this study.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone in your group, don't miss a single time of meeting together, because it just is so much better when we unpack this together and we talk about, man, this is what hit me and this is what hit me, and we unpack this together. So don't miss even one session of your small group together. Not only what you'll get out of it, but the fact is they need you and we need one another. So next time, we'll see you then. God bless.